for me, I still had this underlying trauma and this underlying kind of association with my work and my productivity that would make me make connections with who I am as a person and if I'm good enough. And I carried that with me with everything that I did. So even if I remove myself from a certain workplace or a situation, I would still throw myself at my work and take on too much and be burning out all the time. Speak to me about that.
So for a bit of background, I used to work in corporate advertising, global advertising agencies. And so working for them and working on the client side meant that my client said jump and I said how high. And so I experienced so many periods of burnout. Actually, the way I describe it is that actually my career was one long piece of burnout. And it was punctuated by periods of rest where I was forced to rest. And then when I looked at it, I went, oh. And it wasn't until I got out of advertising that I realized that that wasn't the way to be. Everything was push, grind, hustle. So there was such an underlying of unworthiness for me and people pleasing. And that if I didn't please whoever the people were, be it work or personal, then the relationship would be severed. And I would be left on my own and I would be left out in the dark and nobody would love me. That was the underlying thread of everything. So in order to do that, I had to be the good girl. I had to be the people pleaser. I had to be the perfectionist. I had to be everything to everybody. And then I became nothing to myself because it was a case of I go to work all day. I would come home. I would look after my children. I would do some more work. And then I was too tired to do anything for myself. So I put my head down. I got like a few hours of sleep. I wasn't able to sleep well. I had insomnia for so long. And that every time I gave my word about something, it meant that I was going to do it. And so as I did all of that, there was less and less of me that was available for anything. It got to a point where my body said, you need to rest. And I went, no, we'll rest. We got a little vacation coming up. We'll rest. And then my body said, you need to rest. And I went, no, I'm good. My body said, okay, we're going to put you in the hospital. You are going to have to rest. You are going to be in a state that you cannot actually do the work. And that being in the hospital had me go, it's funny, when you're ill, and you would know this coming from like a medical background, when you are ill, the clarity, the focus that comes in to your life, it's like, I don't need to be doing this. I don't need to be doing that. I don't need to be pleasing this person. I don't need to be worrying about this. I need to change my working hours. I need to change the childcare for my kids. It was just like boom, 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 boom. And then we get out and we start doing all this stuff. And then we forget, right? Our brains forget. And we go back to doing the same thing all over again. And then it happened again. I was really ill again. And right after that, a redundancy came up. And I was like, me, please. Me, please. Because it gave me the space that I needed. And it gave me the space to be able to look at myself and the tools. Because the reason I had all of these problems was because I didn't have enough tools in my tool belt. I had a hammer. So everything became a nail when I had that hammer. I needed a screwdriver and I needed all them other tools that I don't know what tools are for tool belts.
Other tools.
all the tools, right. And so now my tool belt is full. So if it's like self-doubt, okay, Lisa, what are you going to do about that? Let's look into that. What is behind this? What is this specific instance, and what is the big meta picture in this? What are you feeling around this? How can you change things? Not can you change things, because that yes or no, the ego will go, well, no, we can't change things because we've always done it this way. And if we do it this way, then we will always get results. It's like, no, how can I change things so that I can have more inner peace? Inner peace and outer peace. You know, how do I set my boundaries? How do I go about doing things in a different way so that everybody wins? Why did I always have to lose in these situations?
There's so many ways we could go with this, and there's definitely some emerging themes that I can see here that we'll return to. But I guess my question is, you know, so I've definitely I relate to what you said, and I have made all these observations throughout the years where it's like, oh, if I keep going this way, I'm going to end up really sick. Or I've been in times where I get sick just before a vacation. It ruins the whole vacation because like I pushed so hard to try to deserve that break, and then I wasn't able to have one. And then you get angry with yourself for not being able to do what you thought you could have been able to do. And so, you know, what was it that changed for you, where instead of it just being this observation of like, oh, I don't want that to happen again, things have to change, versus like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but for me, I think it tends to relate to self-compassion. There has to be something that changes in my relationship with myself that says, you don't have to earn this rest. You don't have to prove that you're capable of this before you do that. That is a really tough thing to achieve. So I'm curious to know what that was like for you.
That is such a good question, and there are so many ways that I can take that, but I can tell you the one that is sustaining me now is I stopped letting my head lead, and I started living in my heart, and I started doing things that actually worked for me, that I was passionate about. Because the last time I worked in advertising was in 2016, and I was going for job interviews, and I had a dark night of the soul and a really terrible 2 years in there. When I was going for these interviews, my heart wasn't in it. I would be in the place and have to go into the bathroom because I started to have a panic attack, because I literally didn't want to be there. And it was because my head was telling me, you need to get a job. You need to do this. You need to earn this. What will people think of you if you don't do it in this way? What will people think of you if you don't do it in that way? And so I started taking some courses. And actually, it was when I started taking the Enneagram, it taught me to lead from my heart. And because I do work in a child work as well, I had to have all of these conversations because I was literally reconstituting my insides, right? My head is like, normally, I take the lead, I do this, and you, heart and body, you follow along. It's like, no. My heart has to feel it, because if I don't feel it, I may do it because I have to do it, but I'm not doing it because I want to do it. And when I feel something in my heart, then I can get my head to follow me. So that's where that self-compassion that you were talking about comes along. That is where I'm actually sitting here and not thinking about what other people think of me. It's like, what am I doing? What am I getting out of this? Now, obviously, if something has to do with somebody else, then obviously I will think about them. But I spent so much time in not thinking about myself, learning to center myself and not think of it as being selfish, because that was always the thing. Oh, you can't think of yourself first, especially as a woman, because if you think of yourself first, then you're selfish, and that doesn't work for anybody. Well, now it's like my mother said to me, and this really got me thinking. My kids were like 19 and 22, and my mother and I went shopping, and my kids live in the UK, and she's like, my men sons live in the UK, right? And I'm like, oh, I should get this for them. And she said to me, she said, I need you to stop and I need you to look at me. And I'm like, what? She goes, if they want those things, they can get them for themselves. What are you going to do for you? How are you going to do for yourself? When are you going to start putting yourself first and stop putting everybody else first? And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because I had no self-compassion. I had the most savage inner critic that would sit there behind me and tell me everything I did wrong 100 times a day. And it would tell me the things I did wrong last week, last year, 16 years ago, 25 years ago. And nobody could ever criticize me as much as I criticized myself. So I always felt that, well, if I got in there first, right? So if I got in there and told myself all the terrible things that I'd done, when the criticism came from the outside world, it wouldn't be nearly as bad. And the criticism that I always thought was coming, most of the time didn't come. And it didn't stop my inner critic from being any less savage than she was. Has that answered your question better?
Yeah, definitely. I resonate with all of that as well. And I think I'm definitely still on the journey. I would say I'm someone in the middle where I can relate to like a past version of me who was much harder on myself, who didn't allow any room for error, who always wanted it to be done immediately and perfectly and never let anyone down. And then there's kind of this newer emerging version who's like, well, you know, if you don't give yourself this time, who's going to give it to you? Or like, you're responsible for yourself and your life. And if you don't feel great about something, it's not going to be a good experience for anybody involved, because if it doesn't come from the heart, like you said, you're ultimately going to be dragging your heels, you're going to be resentful, you're going to feel, you know, drained by that or stressed by that. And that's going to bring you down in so many other areas of your life as well. So when you start to kind of make that comparison, it becomes an interesting exercise. I think I still kind of find myself in that experimental phase where I'm being more observant of these things. And when you talked about how, you know, in the past you would just do, and you wouldn't really stop to question anything. It's like dictated by someone in front of you. Like, I need this, I want that, it has to be done now, you know? And so I'm kind of in that stage where I'm questioning things more. And if someone gives me a deadline, I'm asking like, why is that the deadline? You know, what are you actually trying to achieve here? Is there any flexibility? Like, how does that work for me? Can I negotiate that in any way? And that kind of, you know, leads me on to more kind of business oriented applications to this, which is that, you know, all our students are learning to be freelancers, and so they'll have their own business. They will have to negotiate contracts, compensation, project, you know, when they get paid and how, and then the deadlines and all of that kind of thing. And they also have the ability to say, no, I don't want to take this on, or I don't want to work with this client anymore, or I don't want to do this type of work anymore, I'm moving in this area. They have so much freedom and control now. But one of the things that I see often is that they're not used to having that freedom or control, and they don't allow themselves to actually exert any of it. And I also struggle with this myself, is that, you know, on the one hand, I recognize I can do anything I want. I can, you know, not work at all if I don't want to, but then I won't have the income. So like, but then on the other hand, it's like, but I find that so overwhelming sometimes that it's easier to just keep doing the same things, because when you start questioning it, you might realize that you made a wrong decision, or like you know, you committed to something that you don't want to follow through on, and then you start thinking, well, who's gonna be mad at me, or what are the consequences gonna be? And then, you know, so for me, I find that there's this phase of like kind of investigation, or like, if it didn't have to be this way, what could it be? And then, you know, once I've kind of figured that part out, then it's like, oh, well, now it's the implementation. Like, am I going to keep doing things the way I have been, or am I going to change them?